Technical difficulties, now we're on.
Now we're on. All right, my name's Matt. I'm an alcoholic. Technical difficulties are always fun. I have a lot of them in my life. I think that's why I'm sitting in this chair. As I was starting to say, a lot of people make fun of my big book, but I always say the same thing, is I put as much effort into my sobriety as I did into my drinking. And I need to. As I said, I just celebrated 8 months on Friday, and there's an app I have that I absolutely love, and I know we're not supposed to play on our phones too much, but it helps me keep track of little things that I do in my life. So every day I get up, I always start my day off with the first step because I know I need it, and that's how I start my day. Because in 8 months, I have not spent $24,700 on drinking, and I have not taken 4,940 shots. That's about 1.5 bathtubs, in case you're wondering how much alcohol I drank. I polished off about a fifth and a half every day, and that's not where my alcoholism began. I mean, in reality, my alcoholism began a long, long time ago. I was a child. I don't know about anybody else. If you remember the little cardboard milk cartons they gave you in school, I learned to start chugging those at the grand old age of 6. My alcoholic behavior began long before I thought about it. But drinking was always part of my family. My parents, in fact, bought the house they did because it was great for parties. They used to throw parties every single weekend. And that all lasted until my father's wedding ring was stolen, and they stopped that. But, drinking was just part of the family. My dad grew up in business, and I don't think my dad really understood how to run the family. So he ran it like a business. And he raised the 3 boys, each with their own roles that they had in the company. My brother, Stevie, the oldest, he's like the CEO. He's really, really good at making the company look good, but don't ask him to make any decisions. He doesn't know how to do it. My brother, Michael, financial wizard. He has the brain that can run numbers like I couldn't even imagine. And then I was the third born, so since the major 2 positions were taken, I became the communications director. I'm really good at spinning yarn, but the issue with it is I did it in every bad way too. I could lie my way in and out of a truck. I got myself out of a lot of trouble. They used to say I could talk a cat off a fish truck or sell ice to an Eskimo. And I guess in a sense that's kind of true. We grew up with an odd family dynamic. My dad was the CFO of a company, but he worked his way up. He worked for a grocery store. And he started at the bottom. Like, he started sweeping the meat on the floor, learned how to cut meat, worked his way up. And his thing was he had to work every single way up by learning it the hard way. While he did that, he put himself through college. And while he was in college, the one night he was sitting at his table, and this nursing student walked up who needed desperately to find somewhere to sit and eat for 5 minutes because she had her clinicals. And she said, "Can I sit with you? I promise I won't talk. Just let me eat." They ended up getting married, and that was my mother and father. My dad says, "I was not going to get married until my 30s. You stole 3 good years of my life." But they had an amazing marriage. My parents never fought in front of us, and that's something I always thank them for. My parents, they both worked hard. My mom was a nurse, as I said, not an easy job, not easy hours, and my dad was working his way up into a company. So we lived with a babysitter from the time I was born until I was about 12 years old. My parents would pick us up on Friday. We'd spend the weekend with them where they would spoil us like little rotten children because they knew that on Sunday they dropped us back off and we didn't get to see them for a week. So those few days were like the best, and that was awesome for us. Then we did that until my brother Stevie turned 16, and the babysitter said, "Well, I can't watch him anymore, but I'll keep the other 2. And my parents were like, "No, we're keeping them together." So we moved home, and that was awesome. Like, we were home finally. Like, it seemed like an awesome thing. My brother, who had his friend that he got to see every weekend, now got to see him all the time. And on weekends, my parents let him have his friend stay over like almost every weekend, which was really cool. Until his friend decided he wanted to experiment with his sexuality, and that was with me. I wasn't really a fan of it, but, I realized that my dad, when I was 12, who taught me how to make his Rob-Roy perfectly, had no clue how much scotch was in that house. So what I did was, during the week, every time I made him a drink, I put some aside so that when Friday came, the friend came over, I could forget about it. It seemed normal to me and fine. When it happened, the first thing I did was I went to my brother because, it would make sense that you tell your brother. And he said he wouldn't do that to you. He's like a brother to me. And when I went and tried to tell my parents, he said I was making it up just because I wanted the attention. It's life. It really was. And the problem was, as I said at that point, I could talk a cat off a fish truck and sell ice to an Eskimo. My character was rotten. Nobody believed me. So it went on until it didn't. And I was fine with that. I started drinking at a young age, around 12. I started drinking almost every weekend just to get through, what was the chaos. But when it eventually stopped at 14, I didn't stop drinking. By the time I got to high school, I had something called a Camelback. It's a backpack with a straw. And I found out you can fit half a fifth of vodka and a quart of orange juice in that with some ice. And it got me through the entire day at school. My football coach called me one morning because I was late to class. And I was lucky that my football coach was an alcoholic. So he said as long as I gave him some, I was okay. I was a really good kid in school. Everybody thought I was great. I'm active in a lot of programs. If you look at my resume on paper, I'm amazing. I'm a published poet. I had the Youth Union League, a Citizen of the Year from Philadelphia. I'm an Eagle Scout. I was in the Future Business Leaders of America, Students Against Destructive Decisions, Key Club. I had straight A's. I was a student mentor, peer mediator. I was good on paper. But I wasn't there. A lot of people tell me how much fun I was in high school, and I guess they're right. I don't know. I can't remember. I spent a lot of my life just drinking. A lot of people say, why did you drink? How did it make you feel? And my answer was it didn't. And to me, that was kind of awesome. I had teenage angst at 12. I had other things in my life, and I just tried to erase it. So by the time I got to college, man, I was already off to the races. Tell me now I don't even have to hide it? It's just a normal thing? I got kicked out of 4 colleges in 5 semesters. And I consider that an accomplishment. I thought it was fun. I did a lot of studying in school. I got a degree in marketing. I did not have the best GPA because apparently you're supposed to attend classes. I think that's ridiculous as long as I learn the information. And I have an eidetic memory, which makes my life easy. Once I learn something, I'm very good at it. Now, my sponsor doesn't understand the difference between photoeidetic and eidetic, which means I can't look at a piece of paper and remember everything. But I have a pretty good mind. My mind is good. It's a nice tool, when it's running properly. But when you keep polluting it with alcohol, it doesn't work so well. So after I graduated from college, I moved home for a little bit, and my parents realized how bad my drinking was and said I had to stop. So I took a professional internship and job with the Walt Disney Company in Florida. Figured, hey, if I get away from them, problem solved. I had a great time. I lived across the hall from Cinderella. We dated for 6 months. I had an amazing time. As I said, I had a great time, and I worked with a whole bunch of characters. And it was a really good time. I got done my college program. I did a professional internship. I worked with the organization, and I helped them launch the Disney Shanghai and Disneyland in Shanghai, China. I got to travel there a few times. I got to work on a whole bunch of really cool projects until I got really drunk in China and urinated on a temple. Luckily, the company was able to get me out before I got arrested because China does not take too kindly to that. And after I got back to the United States, the company let me go. Having worked for that company, I decided I had to go home. Didn't want to exactly tell my parents why. I just said, yeah, the program was up. It was good. I had to get another job, so I started working for another small company. Nobody's ever heard of Comcast. Worked for them for a couple years. Until, again, we were at a function, and we were at the Flyers Stadium, and I decided to urinate on the ice because I had to go. My life has a lot of pissing my life away. And sometimes I did it figuratively, but a lot of times I did it literally. I spent a lot of time in my life trying to figure out why I just didn't fit in. The thing was I was a chameleon. Not only in high school did I do all those clubs I talked about, but I was also a football player, and I did wrestling, and I started the poetry club, and I did forensics and debate and all those things because I just didn't know where I fit in, so I tried to fit in everywhere. See, the problem is my life as a chameleon, I forgot who I actually was. And I think a lot of us have that similar problem. We try so far and so hard to make everybody else happy that we kind of forget how to keep ourselves happy. And that became life. I did that for the long time. As I said, I started drinking at 12 years old, and I didn't really stop drinking until I was 37 this year, 8 months ago. 25 years out of 37 I spent drinking. I mean drinking. I did the math while I was in rehab because they thought it was a fun activity to see how much money we had spent, and I spent just about $756,000 on drinking in my life. And that only includes what I spent. It doesn't include all the free stuff and all the other stuff in my life. I say that because a lot of us always think that like an achievement would be have made $1 million, and again, I pissed 3/4 of that away. I was really close with my dad, as I said, and although he ran his family like a business, him and I were really close. I was like his assistant, and it was great. Except for he knew that I was hiding drinking, and he could see it was a problem, and he always said, if you need help, we're here to help you. And then he died. He was in the hospital for like a normal procedure, and he called my mom to say, hey, I'm good to come home. My mom went to pick him up. She called the hospital, and they didn't answer, so he called his cell phone, and he said, yeah, I'm getting ready. I'll be out in a few minutes. They came out to say, he's running a few minutes late. Can you just move up and park? Came out a few minutes later, brought her in, and said, hey, he passed away. We don't know what happened. Apparently what happened was when they did the procedure, all the oxygen they had him on pushed the fluids down into his lung. And when he was laying flat, it was fine. But when he sat up, he basically drowned. My mom called me to say, hey, we're leaving the hospital. And I thought that meant her and my dad. Now, what I was doing was I was, quote unquote, picking up dinner after working late, which meant I was at a bar waiting for her to call me so I could DoorDash the food to the bar and just drive the 3 blocks home and make it seem like I was really doing something nice. So how shocked was I when my brother, who I don't exactly get along and hasn't walked in the house since he got married, walked in to say Dad died. Of course, there was another moment of that life that I was at a bar. It's where my friends were. They loved me. They cared about me. Until you ran out of money. I kept drinking because I thought maybe if I just kept drinking, I'd feel better and get better, and I didn't. Until finally, a few months ago, I was sitting at a point. I was at the bar, and the bartender said, hey, you've been here for 4 hours, and you've already drank 2 fists of vodka. We don't think it's a good idea for us to keep serving you. I said, that seems fair. So, like a good bartender who cared about me, she said, so you should probably drive home. I got in my car, and I considered backing up and just running into the building as hard as I could because I figured that would, at least that way I'd be out. I'd stop causing people any pain, and maybe that was a good solution. Luckily, the alcoholic in me, for once, saved me because it said, don't do that. Go home and tell them you need help. I'm sure in some point of my mind, the alcoholic was saying, we'll come back to the drinking later, so don't worry about it. But, I went home, I talked to my mom, I decided I need to get help. I wanted to check myself into rehab. And I didn't want to check into rehab to get sober. I don't know if anybody else had that experience. I checked into rehab to learn how to drink properly. I figured these people are professionals. For the longest time, I made fun of AA. I used to say all the time, alcoholics go to meetings and AA is for quitters. And I really thought it was true. In fact, at one point, I actually thought you guys just all got together and drank and had coffee afterwards. That's how you came home sober. I didn't realize there was actually a whole thing behind it. But when I got to rehab, the first few days, I kind of was my smart Alex self. Until somebody said, you seem like a really smart kid. I said, well, thanks, but stop calling me kid. He said, nah, I've got 40 years of sobriety. I'm going to call you a kid. I said, fair. He goes, you're smart, right? I said, I think so. He goes, great, shut up and listen. And I did. He goes, you open your big book? I said, what's my big book? He goes, that blue thing we gave you when you walked in. I said, I thought that was a Bible. He goes, in a sense. Open it up. And that's when I cracked open my big book. I still have my first one at home because he told me go through at first with a yellow highlighter and highlight everything that doesn't apply to you. And then 2 weeks later, go through with a pink highlighter and highlight everything that does apply to you. So the entire book is highlighted, now it looks orange. Because everything that didn't apply to me, it did. I got out of the program and I put as much effort into my recovery as I did into my drinking. I attend at least 6 meetings a week, not because I have to, but because I want to. Because when I first got out, I asked somebody, how long do you have to go to meetings for? He goes, what? I said, how long do you have to go to meetings for? He goes, until you get to. There's just some truth in that. I used to drag myself and go, and then finally I was like, well, I'm running late to the meeting, and I really like this meeting. And now, as I even called him, I'm really sorry I'm running late. But I worked through the steps with my sponsor, and I got the opportunity to do it pretty quickly because he figured out, just like everybody else, I can talk a cat off a fish truck. I can lie to you. But the more time you give me to lie to you, the more time, it's not going to work. So we got through them pretty quick, about 5 months. And now I have a sponsee, and I'm extremely proud of that. We're working him through the steps as quickly as I can because I need it as much as he does. The steps have become an important part of my life because I didn't realize there was an instruction manual. I am your typical man. When I get something, it comes with an instruction manual, and I throw it out. And then afterwards, when I build it, I try to figure out why I have all these extra pieces. And they probably weren't important, and I throw them out. And then I put the first book on that bookshelf, and it falls apart. My life is not really good without instructions. But with instructions, I've kind of realized it's not as hard as I thought it was. As long as I do it in order. So as I said, every morning before I get out of bed, I quietly say to myself the first step. I am powerless over alcohol, and my life is most certainly unmanageable. It took time in my life to realize that I was praying wrong, too. I don't know if a lot of people had that experience, but I did. Because I used to think, at first I thought praying was like talking to Santa Claus. I don't know if you ever felt that. Where I asked for what I wanted and you gave it to me, and it didn't work that way. So then I read up a little bit and I found out that God is a forgiving God. So I thought maybe if I stole what I wanted and asked for forgiveness, that was the way you do it. That doesn't work too well either. I did find out that prayer is two-way. You just have to be quiet and listen. Sometimes he doesn't say it, he just does it, and that's interesting on its own accord. But working the steps is extremely important to me. And if you haven't or haven't done it in a while, congratulations on 9 years. Sometimes we forget, and thank God you're here because I know at some point in my life when I got to 6 months, I was like, I got this. And I think once we say I got this, it's a risky situation because it's kind of like when I used to say, hold my beer. And nothing good happened after that. The step I was asked to talk on this evening is step 10. And I think it's probably one of the most important ones. And that's just my reasoning. Steps 1 and 2 are kind of that admitting we're powerless. And then coming to believe that there's a power. 3 is, facing that power and turning our life over to it. I like to say turning yourself over to power is interesting because you have to know what power is. I don't understand electricity. I know if I plug it in and plug my phone into it, I'm okay. But I do know if I plug it into certain outlets, it works slower, and I plug it in. I just don't get it. I can't understand how if I plug it into the same outlet with a different little plastic block, it charges faster. If you can explain that to me, you're more intelligent than I am. But I plug myself into my power every day because it's important. And without him, I'm a dead battery. And I work my way through the steps, and number 4 and 5 are important. 4 is, we make that inventory. I got to tell you, my sponsor realized me really quick because he kind of showed me the first portion of the inventory where I wrote down all the people that I hurt and all those things. And my resentments was awesome because I thought originally all those people were going to have to apologize to me. This was awesome until I found out that's not how it works. Then he showed me the second portion, which is where I admit my fault, and I didn't like that too much, but it was important. We walked through them together, And we went through 7 and 8, and then came 9. 9's not easy. 9's probably one of the hardest ones because we actually have to face our fears. And fear is something that's amongst each of us. After 9, we're normally feeling pretty good, especially after we got through a lot of them. The issue is they still creep up in our life. Resentments, fears, and all those things. Just because we've done the 9th step, they don't disappear. To where 10 comes in important. 10's important to me because I do it all the time, and I don't do it once a day. I do it probably 50 times a day. On my way here, I probably did it 6 times because I was running late, and I don't like being late. The 10th step is we constantly take an inventory because we don't want those little things to turn into resentments. So I was trying to think of a way to put that into perspective. I came up with 2. The first one is like resentments and how they work amongst us. And the thing I really thought about is like holding your breath. At first, it's not a problem. After you hit the 30-second point, your lungs probably start screaming at you. After a minute, you're tapping out. After a minute and a half, it's probably really bad. And that's the way it is when we hold things in and bottle them up. That's what the 9th step is for. Then I was trying to figure out how to make sure the 10th step got across. The way I thought about it was probably going to be a difference of opinions in this room. I like to cook, and as I cook, I clean. Once I'm done with the pan, I wash that pan and put that pan away. Because that way when I'm done cooking, I don't have a sink full of dishes I have to do. There's other people in this room who might just say, no, you just put them all in the sink, and then when you're done, you clean them. And then you never get to them. So you wake up the next day, and everything's hard on them, and they start to smell, and everything's caked on, and it takes longer, and now you're mad. And that, to myself, is the 10th step. If you do them as they come across you, they don't have a chance to set in. I don't care how good Dawn's Power Wash is. If you let grease solidify, it's going to take some work. But when it's still grease and you just pour it down the drain and wash the pot off, you're normally in a good shape. This program is extremely, extremely important to a lot of people, not just me. But the reason it's important to me is because it makes me realize there's a way of getting through life. I realized that alcohol was not my problem. In fact, in a sense, it was something I was using as a solution. I was afraid of everything else. And the courage I needed to, quote unquote, get through life and survive came from a little bottle. Until the little bottle wasn't good enough, so I got a bigger one. But the issue is what I was putting to myself wasn't good for me. It was poison. And the second I had one drink, I was off to the races. I could be a nice, kind, loving individual. But the second I put a drink in me, that person dies a little bit. And the more I drink, the less loving and kind I am. At least towards everyone else. Page 14 of the Big Book says this program is simple but not easy. There is a price we pay, and that is the destruction of self-centeredness. I can tell you, for the longest time, I thought I was the most important person in this world. In fact, one of the colleges I got kicked out of, they had an amazing worship center on property. But on my way passing it the one weekend, because I was going from my dorm to the frat house, which I'm sure they put that there for a reason, because it was right in the way every time, a woman said to me, "Do you believe in God?" And being the smart person I was, I said, "What kind of person doesn't believe in themselves?" That tells you how dead I was inside. That for some reason I worshipped my own self. I can tell you, I don't do that anymore, and I'm glad, because if I think I'm the most important person in the room, I'm going to miss out on a lot. For everything I know, I don't know anything, and I think that's the best part about this life. Step 10 is important because we don't have an end destination with this program. The 12 steps are there, but the 10th step reminds us that unlike all the previous ones, we have to keep doing it every day. Every single room you go to, you'll hear somebody say, one day at a time, just for today. And it's true, because it's all we have. Because if you don't walk one day at a time and you spend so much time fearing tomorrow or regretting yesterday, it builds up and it's too much. But as long as I can face it one day at a time and walk this path and program alongside everybody else that has, I'm not alone anymore. And I think to me that was the biggest thing, was I thought that drinking made me a part of something, when in reality it isolated me. You know, we all at some point in our life thought we were okay, and drinking brought like joy, and everybody else around us seemed like they were having such a good time. And we looked at them as we kind of put ourselves into a bubble over and over with some alcohol. And then we're on the outside looking in with our face pressed against the window, trying to figure out why we couldn't do that. And normally, we felt good for a while, and then we blew ourselves to oblivion, and we woke up and we faced the 4 horsemen of addiction. Terror, bewilderment, frustration, and despair. And each day that we face those 4 horsemen, and we find a way to overcome them, is another day sober. My name is Matt. I'm an alcoholic, and if nobody's told you today, I love you. That's all I got.